Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, December 22nd, 2011. I'm James Spencer.
And I'm Steve Wilkes.
Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, your home brewing disasters.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait.
We have a bunch of stories this year, and I can't wait to get to them. But first, if you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And the 2012 Brewer's Logbook that Steve designed is here.
Yeah.
And we're sending out stacks of them every day. We're going to sell a lot of those things.
Yeah.
They are in the house and they're going away. It's a limited thing, so.
Limited edition 2012 logbook.
That's right. Get yours while you can. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm Basic Brewing, and you're on Twitter, too.
Yeah, I'm Steve Wilkes.
Steve_Wilkes.
Yes.
You can find us on Facebook. You can find our show page at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you the show, and we greatly appreciate your support. I'll show you afterwards what the kind of stuff that people are buying. It's incredible. Everything from, socks to computers. It's just amazing. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own Magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. You can find our apps on the iPhone and Android stores. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, and we're on Stitcher, too.
Good heavens. As technology advances, this intro gets longer and longer.
I know. It's going to be like an hour and a half before we even get into it.
That's a good thing it's on ancient Egypt. We're also on Papyrus this month. We'll be getting clay tablets soon.
Yeah. Welcome to episode XXXIMCLQ.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can phone us at XXX. MCM.
It's the area code for Illyrium. All right.
Okay, let's get down to it. We got a stack of stuff. Oh, and I have to, before I forget, and I must not forget, if you remember the first time we did this Brewing Disasters story or episode, Brew Haulers had sent us some brew haulers, these strappy things that we say that you put on your carboy that gives it handles. It makes it really easy to carry around and really safe as well. They had sent us like 10 brew haulers, and I said, well, let's just give these away as prizes. So this time I approached the brew hauler folks and said, we're going to do this Brewing Disasters thing again. And, we're always happy to talk about brew haulers. And they sent us a bunch. They sent us a big box of brew haulers. And they sent us a few shirts, and they sent us some like keychains and pens and stickers, and oh my goodness, they sent us so much stuff that everyone who submitted a story this year gets something.
It's a brew hauler cornucopia.
It's a haul of brew hauler stuff. So thank you so much to the brew hauler folks.
Yeah.
You use them.
Oh yeah,
I use them. I don't know how you would deal with brewing with carboys and carrying around carboys without them.
It's not if you're going to break the carboy, it's when you're going to break the carboy.
Or your back.
Yeah. And, plus on Hogan's Heroes, General Brewhauler was my favorite character. Colonel Klink just couldn't get anything over on that guy.
And you had to watch out for his was it his sister or his daughter?
It was his sister.
Okay.
I think Gertrude Brewhauler.
Colonel Hogan. Oh, well. Anyway.
But I digress.
Yeah. So check out your local homebrew store for the brew haulers, and if you've got carboys, get you a brew hauler.
Yeah.
So they are essential equipment, in my opinion. So thank you so much to the brew hauler folks for giving us the stuff.
Yeah.
So first off, this is not. I'm going to start off with this one just because it's fun. It's not an official brewing disaster story, but I think it's a nice lead-in to what we've got. This is from Matt in Littleton, Colorado. He says, "My name is Matt, and I'm a BBR-aholic." He says, "I realized I had a problem when I woke up last night during a dream in which I was somehow at your house looking at your conical fermenter, which I don't think you have, and I don't. And in my curiosity, I opened the ball valve and dumped a full 5-gallon batch on the floor. That's when I woke up worrying how I was going to break the news to you. Matt says, funny thing is, before I went to bed last night, I was listening to one of your old episodes in which you were talking about conicals with the members of Flops, the Fayetteville Lovers of Pure Suds.
Yeah.
Due to this disturbing occurrence, I've decided no more Basic Brewing Radio past 9 p.m. I just can't handle another James Spencer dream.
If you can.
I don't blame you. Holy smokes. That is a brewing nightmare.
Yeah.
Not just spilling the wort, but, having dreaming of me. Ugh. So, thanks, Matt. We appreciate that.
That's great.
So it's a virtual. That's like a brewing disaster in the holodeck. Okay, we got a stack of these. Let's get through them. This is from Andrew in Winnipeg, up in Canada.
Yes.
He says, so my brewing disaster starts with my brewing pot envy. My friend is a chef, and at his place he has a stock pot that is huge, and I pined over brewing with it for a long time. Finally, my friend went on a trip, and I got to house sit his place for a week. The first night after I dropped him at the airport, I went right to the local homebrew store to pick up stuff for a robust porter. I got back to his place around 9 o'clock and started my mini mash going right away. Everything went smoothly. Then, as I'm adding my hops, I look at the boiling wort and notice a bit of a sheen. Not a Charlie sheen.
Not a Charlie sheen.
Kind of like an oil slick. Well,
that would be Charlie sheen.
Well, there was nothing I could do. I boiled for the hour and put the pot outside to chill. It was about minus 35 degrees Celsius.
Wow, so don't need a wort chiller up there.
No, holy smokes. He said the rest of that night went smoothly again. All in all, it was a successful brew. Fast forward to the end of fermentation, I went and told my friend about the sheen on top before we went to look at the beer, and he had told me that a few days before he had made a beef stock in that pot and really didn't give it a good scrub. Well, we went to look at the beer, and it had an inch of fat sitting on the surface.
Oh, my God.
We didn't give up on it, though. It was a few weeks before we could bottle, so there it stayed nicely protected from any oxygen and nasties. We eventually bottled, and when we tasted it on bottling day, it tasted like a good, robust porter. After a month, we cracked the first one, and it was overcarbonated. I think it was my fault, though. But holy mother of God, if that wasn't the best robust porter we ever had.
Wow.
So there you go. Well, they McDonald's used to put beef fat in their fries.
That's right, they did, yeah.
So maybe...
wow. I don't know what to add to that. I think I'll throw a ham hock in my next Pilsner just to see what happens.
This is from Cody. Oh, our names are Cody and Nicole, and we're from Charleston, South Carolina. My wife and I decided to make an IPA. It would be our third beer and fourth fermentation. We did a cider, but that took a little effort. We have done all partial mashes, and they have the recipe for the IPA. We went through the normal brewing process fine. I overpoured the dilution by a quarter of a gallon and forgot to take the original gravity before pitching. We shook it and got 1032, which is not very big for an IPA. I looked at the grain bags, which I still had aside in some pots, and noticed they weren't crushed.
Ooh.
I don't know how we neglected to check before pouring into the muslin bags, but we're still newbies, and it's a newbie mistake. So what could we do? We decided to take some Pils Light dry malt extract we had in the freezer, boil it up, and pitch it. Hopefully this would bring it up. 10 ounces of dry malt extract and half a gallon of water brought it up. 5 3/4 gallons and 1035 specific gravity. We said, whatever, stuck it in a water bath and put the 2 grain bags in the fridge. I had too busy of a day the next day to lose any more sleep, so I came home the next day, and it's bubbling away pretty well. So I said, forget it. Well, he said something else, but I was going to... And decided to crush the soggy grains and mash them. I stuck them half a bag at a time into my food processor and pulsed them for 5 seconds. I rebagged them, mashed and sparged, then I boiled for a couple hours to bring down the volume. I brought it down to about 0.8 gallons and stuck it into a gallon growler. After cooling and shaking it, I thieved half a gallon out of the carboy, poured the second mash juice in, poured about 75% of what I thieved back in. Are you following this?
Yeah.
Jerry rigged an overflow tube with a cut-up airlock bung and siphon tube, stuck the end in a clean growler with water, and hoped for the best. The carboy was filled to the neck. After an initial ferocious blow-off and a very dirty growler and siphon tube, it settled down. It's been 2 weeks and looks normal. We'll never know what the original gravity was, but the final gravity is 1010. So that sounds good. We're going to drink 2 or 3 of each and see how we compared to our 6% stout. So there's
a happy ending there.
Yeah, things can go badly on a brew day, but you can still fix it.
Yep.
That's the thing. I mean, a lot of these stories end up badly, but, a lot of them, they save it.
Well, yeah, and like the previous one with the beef fat, I mean, I would have thrown that away. But,
But they stuck with it.
Yeah.
And it was a good beefy porter. You could call it Beef Eaters porter. This is Dan in Lakeville, Illinois. A couple of years ago, I got around to brewing a Belgian patterned after your Belgian blonde. I used the techniques for home preparation of Belgian candy sugar syrup that you covered in Basic Brewing Radio, and we did on Basic Brewing Video. Mm-hmm. Well, that was
a brewing disaster, almost.
We recovered that one, though.
Yeah.
The brew day went fine. I prepared the Belgian candy syrup while the mash was resting. The beer was racked to secondary after 4 days and then bottled after 7 more days. The day after bottling, I was thinking about how long I'd have to wait for the beer to bottle condition before I could try it. It suddenly dawned on me that I hadn't added priming sugar when I bottled. A quick trip to the brew store for Munton's priming tabs. I heard you talk about using these in the podcast and more caps. This rescued the situation, and 3 weeks later, I was able to enjoy a delicious Belgian homebrew.
Yeah.
So there you go. I've had a similar question. My bottles are under-primed. What can I do? Well, that's apparently a situation. It's a solution that works.
Mm-hmm.
So those are handy. I've saved the dramatic ones for the ending.
Good.
Andy in Virginia. I brewed a double IPA last week. It was Jamil's recipe from Brewing Classic Styles, which I've brewed before with an acceptable degree of success. I wanted to try to substitute some of the late and dry hop additions with Amarillo and Sriracha Ace, which we haven't used yet. Mm-hmm. Ordered the ingredients, $40 plus, and spent a week planning, doing a yeast starter, listening to Basic Brewing Radio, and brew strong to subliminally re-implant high-gravity brewing techniques, etc. Brew day happened with the usual hiccups and challenges, clogged sparge, adjusting pH and pre-boil gravity on the fly, hit my numbers, boiled and cooled, whirlpooled, started transfer to fermenter, dumped initial trube, and started to collect clear wort. So far, so good. Mm-hmm. Got about half a gallon in the carboy when I was called away with a minor emergency.
And now the trouble starts.
Transfer seemed to be going well, so I decided to let it continue unattended. Boom, boom, boom. Minor emergency turned out to be a minor/major emergency. Took about 25 minutes to return to brewing operations. Climbed the stairs and rounded the corner. Heard the cha-chung sound from L.A. Law as I saw the carnage laid out before me. Through deductive reasoning, I determined that approximately 1 minute had passed between the time I left the scene and the time that the transfer line became dislodged from the carboy cap. The brew stand and carboy were now islands in the middle of Lake of the Wort.
Yeah.
I stared in shock as I watched the last few drops of wort drip from the boil kettle to the deck floor below. I went through all the grief stages in about 5 minutes. Cleanup is the least fun part of the brew day. It is usually, however, mitigated by the knowledge that you have a batch of hopefully the best beer you have ever made just weeks away from enjoyment for you and your friends. Cleaning up a brew day disaster with no reward in sight is like doing time. It just plain stinks. So he says, my next brew will be a TION beer in the fashion of the beers from Russian River, supplication and all that. Andy says, I don't know what style it'll be, but I plan to call it Redemption.
Redemption.
I think we've all left the scene and paid for it.
Yeah, I have a problem sometimes with the bottling bucket and leaving the little spigot open. So I'm putting the beer in to be bottled, and I have had that turned incorrectly in the past.
And so you notice as you're racking.
Why isn't this filling up?
You look at the other side, and the floor is brown now.
Yeah.
Zach says, and I'm not sure where Zach is from. It was the first time brewing in my new house, and I really had not developed a good rhythm or efficient strategy of moving around the home and multitasking on a brew day yet. We don't have a really deep sink in the new house, so I was filling the kitchen sink with warm water and star sand to soak all my utensils that were needed for post-boil care. As I was filling the sink, my timer went off, signifying that my boil was over. So I ran downstairs to take it off the heat and put my wort chiller in. I had left the sink running intentionally because I was only going to be gone for a few minutes while I ran downstairs to tin my wort. If you can't see it coming, here it is. Somehow, those few moments got extended. And how would that be? What substance do we brew that would get us distracted on the brew day? Somehow those moments got extended as I forgot about the sink upstairs and decided to enjoy a homebrew. As I waited for my wort to chill. Cut to 10 minutes later, the garage door opens and my wife walks in with groceries. Hi, honey.
Hi, how you doing?
She's sitting in a chair in the garage drinking a beer, and as she walked into the house, water began pouring through the drywall above.
Oh, my.
He says that was the last time I was allowed to use the kitchen sink.
Yeah. Boy, that's not good.
So I told him, well, that's a good excuse for you to get a sink for your garage. And he said, he wrote back, he said the work sink was installed the following weekend. So that's a positive side. You can use these brewing disasters to parlay into new gear. Mark from Ann Arbor, Michigan, says a friend in the Ann Arbor's Brewers Guild suggested I forward this on to you. As a brewer who kegs, the one dreaded sound is the final burp and hiss of CO2 when a keg kicks. A sad day indeed, but also exciting to rotate something new into place. Mm-hmm. I have a well-intentioned but highly accident-prone neighbor, whose name is Marty, by the way. Says he loves to help out on brew days. I had my grain all set out on top of my chest freezer in the basement and was carrying things up, arms loaded, to the garage for brewing. He grabbed the last big bag of grain behind me, and off we went to crush and dough in. A while later, I went down to fetch some hops from my well-stocked freezer and walked into a room of hissing / CO2 belching taps and a river of beer on the floor. Yeah. He had pulled the bag of grain across the top of the fridge, pulling all 4 taps forward to full on without realizing. He's also hard of hearing. All of my kegs dispensed themselves onto the floor, including some beer I had only moments before been raving about and grateful to have. I was speechless. I don't know if I'd be speechless.
Yeah. Oh, my.
He was practically kicking his own butt for his actions, but I just got to cleaning it up as there was nothing to be gained by indulging remorse at that point. The shop vac was going, followed by a lot of wet mopping to get all the beer, stickiness, and funk. What a bummer that was. So the only thing worse than a tap blowing out CO2 is 4 taps blowing out CO2. It says it killed the CO2 tank too. He says that he's going to have his neighbor listening to the show, and we should definitely guilt Marty into buying him some beer.
Yeah, I think so. Good beer too.
I think if there's anything worse than spilling or losing your own beer.
It's having someone else lose your own beer.
Or spilling somebody else's beer. I mean, if we walked into Andy's magic beer fridge and accidentally tapped his kegs.
Or unplugged it.
Yeah. That would be a problem.
Yeah.
Jeff from St. Louis, Missouri Like others who keg, I found my chest freezer full of beer, either because the picnic tap dribbled everything out overnight or I didn't tighten the liquid outpost properly. Before I had kegs, I used to rack my lagers to a 5-gallon carboy and put them in the temperature-controlled chest freezer. One day I did so, and realizing that the freezer was empty, I might as well clean it. After cleaning, I put my double-decocted Vienna lager in the freezer and set the temp control to 34 degrees. Several days later, I went to put another carboy in the freezer and found my Vienna a solid piece of ice, and the carboy had broken into big chunks of glass. After I cleaned the freezer, I neglected to put the temperature probe back in. So there you go.
Yep.
And then the first time I did a recirculating whirlpool with a pump, I had my wort chilled nicely. I disconnected the hoses and went to get my sanitized carboy, only to find my Hefeweizen wort draining all over the patio when I returned. The recirculation arm acted like a siphon tube, and the downward pressure of the wort forced it up through the recirculating arm and out the hose I disconnected from the pump. So anyway, lots of little disasters. Carrie from Chino Hills, California. He sent 2. I'm going to read 1.
Okay.
We got a big stack. My brewing disaster involves me making a Belgian wit beer. I've learned over the years to always have spray bottles of water near my boil kettle to settle down an overly vigorous boil, which is a good trick. If it comes up, you can spray some water in there. But the day before brew day, I was having trouble with my CO2 manifold leaking into my kegerator. I was trying to hunt down the leak using soapy water to make bubbles.
Oh, foreshadowing.
I put a good squirt of dishwashing soap into my spray bottle with water and used that to spoil my connections and successfully found my leaks. I'm sure you figured out now that during my brew day of the wit beer, I used the same spray bottle to calm down a vigorous boil several times and sprayed super soapy solution into my boil. My heart hit the floor, but I kept trying to think of thoughts in units of parts per million and not worry. Happy to report that the wit came out fantastic and was a huge hit at my Oktoberfest party. To this day, I used colored spray bottles to identify what's in them.
So it didn't. I was expecting it to be a ruined batch.
Well,
so the
apparently
little bit of
not.
soap didn't.
I guess it either boiled off or
wow.
Or that the firm cap stuff, is kind of a, what do they call it?
It's a surfactant, isn't it?
Surfactant. Yes. I was going to say dispersant, but I knew that wasn't it. So maybe it all settled to the bottom or something. I don't know. Sounded good. The head had that little rainbow color probably that some soap bubbles have. Sean from Portland, Maine. The reason I'm writing is to share with you my most catastrophically disastrous brew day ever.
Ooh.
I just received a bunch of free hops from work, Cascades and Willamette, so I decided to brew up a nice American IPA to celebrate the free goods. And he didn't say where he works. It must work at a homebrew shop or a brewery. Well, I mashed in, and immediately the problems began. I hit about 10 degrees below my target mash temp, 140 degrees. Channeling Charlie, Relax, Don't Worry, a Papazian, I cracked a homebrew and added some boiling water and called it a step mash. When it settled in at 148, I went out to grab a bite. When I came back, I noticed that the floor was a bit sticky. Looking into the ton, I realized I'd lost almost half of my volume from a leaking spigot. Cursing my lack of equipment upkeep, I cleaned up the spill, ran off, and then stuck my sparge, which took me a half hour to fix. At this point, I was about 11 points low in my gravity. When emptying out my spent grain to bring to compost, the mash tun tipped off my kitchen counter and the spent grain spilled all over the floor.
Oh, no.
After a heavy cleanup and a consolation homebrew, I left to bring the grain down to the compost. When I came back, I was surprised to find my stove was on fire.
We're not laughing at you. We're laughing with you.
I'm laughing a little bit at it.
Well, yeah, okay.
So I removed the kettles. I do a split boil, smothered the fire, cleaned off the stove, and continued with my boil. See? You do not let anything stop the brew day.
Yeah.
To compensate for the lack of gravity and liquor, I added some more water and DME. So still he's saying, I'm a few gravity points. The kitchen's on fire. The floor is sticky.
Oh, my God.
Oh, this is not a married man.
No. Or if he is, not for long.
Long story short, too late. I ended up transferring 5 gallons of 1060 wort, my target gravity, into my carboy, aerated, pitched, and my Murphy's Law IPA is now bubbling away quite happily. The message in all of us, do regular equipment maintenance. Almost anything can be fixed if you're adequately prepared. And as Charlie says, relax, don't worry, have a home brew. And I'll add, and a fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. Oh, my goodness. I was surprised to find the stove on fire.
How often do you get to say that?
Not often, I hope.
Not
often. Doug from Glendale, Arizona. I was brewing a Bell's Two-Hearted Ale clone one Saturday.
Yeah.
All was good all day. Wort was boiling, added hops at the right time. The hour was done. The wort smelled and looked great. I hooked up my plate chiller, turned on the water. The wort was flowing like always. I stepped away for a few. Bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the hoses fell off the chiller. By the time I noticed, I had lost 3 gallons. I wasn't sure what to do, so I just added water and hoped for the best. I fermented it and kegged as usual. Well, it turned out good, but no two-hearted ale, but drinkable. Lesson learned, never leave it alone.
Yes.
Never leave it alone. Despite what your mother told you when you were a teenager.
Well.
Oh, this one came with a photo.
Oh, yeah.
This is Darnell from Stilson, Georgia. Darnell, you've heard Darnell Browner on the show talking about, what was it he was talking about? Oh, preheating grains, I think. Darnell says, this happened to be 2 months ago with what was supposed to be the first stout of the season. It was my first experience of racking fresh wort on top of finished beer's yeast cake. The plan was to go from ESB to stout to robust porter, so stepping up with the yeast cake. I was amazed at how quickly the stout fermented and how great it looked in the carboy. The day came to brew my porter. I first started racking my stout into a secondary so the primary yeast could come up to temperature. The racking tube couldn't reach the carboy, so I put it on a small cube cooler. Concerned with oxidation, I wanted the secondary container even closer. So, out of a fit of stupidity, I put a 1-gallon paint bucket on top of the cooler.
Oh, no.
Only after the secondary was completely full of my perfectly fermented stout, it fell. And 5 gallons of beer and glass went everywhere. And he's got a picture of the floor with broken glass. And there's the thing, the bucket with the paint can on top.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Don't want to use that brewing book from Howard Find and Howard. And if you get that, you're yeah.
Yeah, broken. Boy, that's that's one broken carboy that the brew hauler probably wouldn't have helped.
No,
because even with a brew hauler, if you stack it up on a stack of Jenga blocks, that's going to be it's going to be a problem. Pete from Ottawa, Ontario, in Canada. It was New Year's Eve. I usually start my brewing early so that I'd finish mid-morning. I made my batch of Czech Pilsner, did a snowbank chilling to cool the boiled wort. After I siphoned it to the carboy, I noticed that it was still a bit warm, so I put it in a container filled with water and snow to further chill it. Up until that day, I would always aerate my beer by sitting on the stairs in the dining room with the carboy on my knee. I come from Alabama with the carboy on my knee. And I would violently shake it. That day I found out that a cold, wet carboy could be slippery. Yes, while shaking it, it slipped out of my hand, hit the floor, and shattered. Wort and glass went everywhere. Did I mention I was barefoot at the time? I gingerly stepped down the stairs and over to a pair of shoes that were not far away. At least I would not cut my feet up while cleaning it up. Did I mention that my wife was out at the time? I had the idea of cleaning it up before she got back. I kept that idea until I went down to the basement and saw wort dripping from the ceiling.
Oh, no.
And running down a wall. It's amazing how 5.5 gallons of wort can get all over the place. Did you know that flowing wort will lift up a carpet, allowing glass to get several feet under it? We do now. My wife was not amused when she got back home. It took several days to get things clean after that. Oh, and my feet, which I protected by putting my shoes on? Later, I took the shoes off, and my feet were a bloody mess. When the carboy shattered, glass flew everywhere, including into a pair of nearby shoes. I now aerate my wort by rocking a milk crate, which holds the carboy. It takes a bit longer, but it's a lot safer.
Yeah, boy, that's...
Now, my question is, when summer came, how bad were the ants?
Yeah, I was thinking about ants, too. Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
Because you had the situation where we made that mead in your kitchen and spilled a little bit of must on the floor, and you had like 5 moppings later. It was still sticky in there. And yeah, when you get wort, I mean, under the carpet, in between the walls and oh, my God.
Talk about your house yeast. You're going to really have some house flavors. At least he wasn't surprised to find the stove on fire.
Yeah, there's always something. You were just Mr. Silver Lining. Ryan from Colebrook, New Hampshire. Hope I'm not too late to add a story to the Brewing Disasters list. This isn't so much of a disaster as a learning experience. My wife finally got tired of me making a mess of the kitchen while brewing and forced me to take advantage of a good deal on a propane burner and kettle. See?
Yeah, there you go.
See, if you screw up so much, your wife says, get out of the kitchen. Buy some stuff, whatever you have to do. Ryan says, as I've always done partial boils in a 4-gallon pot, I don't have any cooling equipment, but being anxious to try my new toys, I decided to brew a batch. After setting up, I figured I could still do a partial boil batch so I wouldn't have any cooling concerns. I soon learned the hard way that a 2.5-gallon boil in a 10.5-gallon pot can and will still boil over if you leave it unattended.
Mm-hmm. There's a theme. There's a theme arousing.
Don't leave it alone.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a long one. I may have to paraphrase. This is Jake from Durand. Is that Durand, Wisconsin?
Yes.
Says, my disaster story may not qualify as a true disaster, but since the end result wound up being one of my favorites so far, as logic would dictate, the opportunity for a disaster increases greatly every time you change something. So it should come as no surprise my disaster came on my first all-grain brew day. My father-in-law's favorite beer is Anchor Steam, so I decided to make a batch of Jamil's Uncommonly Lucky from Brewing Classic Styles. Being obsessed with learning new information, I'd done a lot of reading before embarking on this journey and felt pretty prepared. Let's see how it went, he says. When I had built my cooler mash tun the weekend before, I purchased regular PVC pipe for the manifold, not the type for high pressure and temperature. I noticed a potential problem as I was pouring my strike water into the cooler. My nice, flat manifold now approximated the shape of elbow macaroni. I got all the pieces back together and stirred in my grain and mashed for an hour. Due to the deformity and reassembly, I have no idea what the mash temperature was when I finally got the grain in the cooler. So about 15 minutes, I started heating my mash out water. It wound up taking about 20 minutes, so the mash went longer than it should have. Figuring it's better to keep going, I just kept the mash out water, the same temperature called for, and dumped it into the cooler. I let it set for 10 minutes to settle after stirring and started to run off into my kettle. I know you're supposed to run off the water slowly to help rinse all the sugar from the grain, but my friend's sparge seemed to run faster than this. He must have sat with his friend and watched. After taking 20 minutes to run off approximately 1 gallon, I figured something was wrong. I started scooping my mash into a bucket, which I've done before, and quickly discovered my manifold had fallen apart and come completely disconnected from the coupler leading to the ball valve. I got everything back together and held it in place while I added my mash back to the cooler, Vorloft, and started to fill my kettle. I got my wort boiling and added my hops according to the recipe. The rest of the brew went smoothly. I chilled the wort and racked into my carboy. He says the observant among you may have noticed something missing from my tale, the batch sparge. So he didn't. Jamil's recipe plans for you to have 5.5 gallons of liquid racked into your fermenter. I had 3.5 gallons. I wound up bottling around 3 gallons of 6.78% ABV Imperial common beer. Now all I have to figure out is how to replicate all the problems that I had into a bigger batch. My father-in-law agreed it's been one of my best batches yet. So there you go.
I love that story. But the bit about replicating your mistakes, there's some truth to that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
One of the best beers that I ever made. I still remember it. It was my old disaster. I just had a total disaster of a brew day, and the beer was great. And it's like, well, how do I do that again? I don't know.
That was a good beer. And you've also had the problem, haven't you, of the PVC pipes getting disconnected in your mash tun and all that? It seems like you had something like that going on.
I don't remember having that happen exactly, but yeah. Well, I mean, once you get a stuck sparge and you have to start digging around in there, the way that my manifold was built, it could come apart. So, yeah, that may have happened to me and I've forgotten.
You've blocked it successfully, blocked it out of your memory.
Well, I had it suppressed, but now I have to go back to therapy because of you.
Boy, if I had a nickel for every time.
Now, having dreams.
No, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said, I had that suppressed, but now I have to go back to therapy. Thanks to you.
Thanks to you.
Jason from Los Gatos, California. Do you remember what Los Gatos means?
No.
The cats, I believe. It says, let me set the stage for you. Last night was a nice breezy night with wind gusts around 45 miles per hour. I brew outside of my driveway because I don't have a garage. This spot was relatively sheltered from the wind, or as Tom Brocco would say, relatively sheltered from the wind. And I considered it the safest place to fire up the big propane burner. Safety first.
That's right.
All was going great with the extract batch that I'm calling a winter seasonal, a New Belgium snow day clone with iced oatmeal cookie ingredients. That should be just shy of 7 degrees ABV, or 7% ABV. I got my wort chiller ready and popped it into the kettle to get a few minutes of boil time for sanitizing. It's now about 11 p.m., and this is where things got interesting. I usually zip tie the wort chiller tubing to the bottom of my burner stand to prevent any tubing from flailing when the water pressure is introduced, and I had, in fact, done that this night. I turned the propane burner off. I walked 25 feet away to turn on the hose bib to start the water flowing through the wort chiller and returned to the kettle to monitor the cooling progress and agitate the wort to promote more rapid cooling. 10 seconds later, I returned. It happened. Pop! Spray! The tubing connected to the inlet of the wort chiller burst. Water was spraying into the kettle. Water was spraying on me. Water was spraying everywhere. The tubing did not completely separate from the wort chiller. It was still hanging on. What do? I grabbed the hose and kinked it. So, that part solved. At least the water stopped spraying everywhere, but the hose bib to turn the water off was 25 feet away. Now, what do? I've got to get the water turned off at the hose bib, but I don't want to let go of the kink in the hose and let the spraying resume. I had a plan. Step on the kinked hose to keep it kinked and free up both of my hands to get the wort chiller out of the kettle. Thank goodness I had a pair of cutters in my back pocket, literally, to cut the zip tie holding the wort chiller tubing to the burner stand so that I could, in fact, lift the wort chiller out of the kettle. Next step, use the cutters to cut the tubing off the wort chiller. Next, grab the kink in the hose and walk it back to the hose bib to shut the water off. Crisis ended. Time to repair the damage and save the wort. So he says his priority was to save the wort, turn the burner back on, and bring the wort back to a boil for a few minutes to sanitize any of the freshly added water. Done. Next, fix the wort chiller by cutting about 18 inches off the tubing and reattaching it to the barb on the wort chiller. Almost done. Oh, crap. Boil over. So you can still be on the scene and be distracted.
Yeah.
My first one ever. You'll remember that it was a very windy night. Because of that, I had to pay attention to the flame on my burner and the amount of heat it was pumping out all night. In my distraction of wort chiller repair, I didn't notice the rising bubbles in my kettle until I heard the sizzle on my burner from the wort coming in contact with the flame. Immediately, I turned the flow rate down on the propane. Okay, boil over stopped. A nice gentle boil resumed. So he fixed the wort chiller. At the end of this brew session, I now have a kettle that's a mess on my paver driveway to clean up, and a little ego repair to do. The first two were completed as a matter of course. The third will be taken care of with some time passing. So, even when you think you're a genius, you're fixing that one problem.
Mm-hmm.
The beer gods.
Sometimes they just don't smile on you.
You fly too close to the sun.
Yeah, and your bung melts. We've all had that happen.
I don't know if I've ever heard that phrase.
Well, stick around.
This is Jim from Westbury, New York. Our man in Munich, which is he's on our website, a picture of him, and we met him at one of the homebrew conferences.
Yeah.
He went to Oktoberfest and wore his basic brewing shirt. My nightmare is this, Jim says. I have a two-tier system with the hot liquor tank and kettle on the lower level and the mash tun above. I use a March pump to move liquor to the tun or hot wort through a chiller and into the fermenter. This is done with two home-built manifolds, one on each side of the pump. Okay, you got the picture?
Yes.
On this session, I ran off 8 gallons of ESB into the kettle, and as the boil started, I opened up the valves for the chiller in order to start the sanitizing process. About 10 minutes later, I looked at the kettle sight glass and found it had lost about 5 gallons of wort. It wasn't on the floor, so it wasn't a leak. And then I saw that I had left the valves to the hot liquor tank open, and the wort had sought its own level in the hot liquor tank. Horrors abounded. After a few deep breaths, I repumped it back in and did about a 2.5-hour boil to get back my gravity. So it still came out decent. And ever since then, I'm very careful using the pump. Live and learn. Mm-hmm. So he just essentially diluted his wort.
Yeah.
But that's, easily done with time and propane. This is Noam from Israel. He says, with regards to brewing catastrophes, here's mine. I brew in a bag exclusively. I use an electric kettle. When I first started using this kettle, I would regularly overshoot my strike water temperature. Chilling the strike water back down is a lot harder than slowly warming it up to strike temperature. Mm-hmm. So one brew day, I was very careful while heating the water. I did it very slowly while being careful to take constant temperature readings. I was so proud of myself. See, Icarus.
Yep.
When I finally reached my precise strike temp without overshooting it, I proceeded to add the crushed grain. Only then did I realize that I had not put my brew in a bag into the kettle first. So he's just mashing in the kettle. I had to use a spaghetti strainer to take all the grain out and into a pail, and then drain the water through a strainer, and then wash out the kettle and put the water back in, and then add the bag and the grain. By this time, the grain had been wet and probably started enzyme activity, and the water had lost about 10 degrees Celsius. Anyway, the beer ended up okay, so I guess it's not the worst catastrophe as catastrophes go. So there you go. You get too proud of yourself.
Yep.
You're good. You got to be humble.
You got to stay humble.
Brewing keeps you humble. Joshua from Tampa, Florida. I have a brewing nightmare story for you for the show. About 2 years ago, I was brewing up an extract batch in the garage, and I just got the boil going, added my 60-minute additions, and had some time to kill before the next addition. So I decided to wash my wife's car while the boil was going.
That's a mistake. I'm telling you.
I extended the hose out and started to wet down the car, and the hose got caught in something, so I gave it a tug. Next thing I know, the hose comes shooting at me with a spigot attached to it. Then I looked at the inside wall of the garage in confusion. and I saw water gushing out of the wall on the opposite side where the spigot was, on the interior wall of the garage, as the spigot was on the exterior of the garage. So needless to say, my wife got a quick lesson on how to brew so I could fix the problem while she finished brewing the batch for me. I was more worried about the beer than the piping, of course. Now there's a well, I don't know how patient she was, but she was a helpful spouse.
Yes,
in that regard. Mike from Twin Falls, Idaho. This really isn't a disaster, just a mildly amusing anecdote. We'll be the judge of that.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of a mildly amusing anecdote. That's what I've heard anyway.
That's my tagline on my business card, my job description. In March, when I was experimenting with 1-gallon batches, I wasn't accustomed to star sand and its lubricant effect on stoppers. After getting 2 batches of Irish Red in the fermenters, I put the airlocks on, filled them with vodka, and then noticed that they kept sliding out. I couldn't get them to seat in the jugs.
I'm not going there. I'm just not going to go there. Y'all just make up your own joke.
Now you can't put a story with lubricant, stoppers, and jugs and not have us laugh. I've since learned how to deal with that situation. Just leave it alone. But at that time, I was in a panic. My wife suggested duct tape. Now there again, and lacking a better idea, I took her suggestion. See attached, and he's got the picture with the my son loves to play with the duct tape, so he would appreciate that the stoppers are duct taped to the jugs. Is there nothing that duct tape cannot do?
No.
Thanks, Mike. This is now we start getting into the scary ones. Joe from Dover, Pennsylvania. First, there was the time, he says a few brewing disasters for us. First, there was a time I put my wort chiller into the brew pot to sterilize it in the last 15 minutes of the boil, and the out hose hit the burner and melted off. Not a big deal for this brew. I just had a short out hose on the chiller. It worked fine for several brews, but my wife kept telling me I needed to replace it. See, if your wife is telling you need to buy gear,
go buy it.
That's a sign.
Yeah.
She even bought me new tubing. I said, it'll be fine. Famous last words. I brewed a batch of smoked porter, and when I attached the chiller to the faucet, turned it on, and the short hose aimed itself at me, I brewed a batch of smoked porter, and when I attached the chiller to the faucet, turned it on, the short hose aimed itself at me, soaking my shirt and leaving a burn on my arm that was shaped like a phallus. The worst part was my wife showing off my new burn to all of our friends and telling me, I told you so. And here's another story. He's got 3 of them. We're short of time. I'll save that one. My first time I tried to save yeast, I bottled it and kept it. I know, he says. I left it in the refrigerator for several months until I decided it was no longer worth saving. I pulled it out and sat it on the counter. Later, I saw it there and said to myself, I should dump this. Now, here's foreshadowing. My wife just spent hours cleaning the kitchen, and she did a wonderful job. I went over to the bottle opener on the wall and popped off the cap. The yeast shot up out of the bottle, hit the ceiling, sprayed all over the walls and floor, went into the living room and dining room. I could not stop laughing until I looked over at my wife and saw she did not find this as amusing as I did. Thanks, Joe. Oh, okay. This is Evie from Iceland. He has co-founded a homebrew club over there that has 20 to 30 members, and they have a forum with over 200 members.
Wow.
So congratulations.
Yeah.
The worst brew day I've ever had was not because of bad luck or anything like that. It was purely because of my own stupidity. I was making my first dry stout. It was a good recipe, and I was pretty excited about it, so I got everything ready on brew day, got the mash going, and waited. When the time came to run off, nothing happened. Not a drop came out. I thought about it for a while and then realized that I'd forgotten to put the hose braid in the mash tun. So I was essentially trying to run the whole mash out, unfiltered. I took a moment to think it over and realized that lucky enough I had discarded had a discarded mash tun somewhere, so I could use that as a lauter tun. I put the hose braid in there and proceeded to pour the mash over. Obviously, a sane and remotely intelligent person would have scooped most of it over, but no, I thought pouring would make quick work out of it, and it did, but it also spattered pitch black wort all over the place. I brew in a converted garage, and there are white curtains and things that don't do well with that sort of things. Formerly white curtains. It looked a little bit like I had brutally murdered a person made of licorice. But anyway, to make a long story short, I got the wort into the brew pot and got through the boil without decapitating myself, which is always a good thing. And then it was time to chill, so I hooked up my immersion chiller to the tap, put the outflow end into the sink, and started chilling. Now, I don't know if the previous screw-ups had somehow made me feel like I could just turn off my brain entirely, but this was my shining moment of idiocy. For some reason, I had left a bunch of stuff in the sink. Now there were hoses and things added with the chiller, so it was pretty crowded. And the first thing I decided to do after I started the chill was to start tidying up in the sink. A wrong move caused the outflow hose to shift a bit and sprayed my forearm with boiling water.
Yeah.
Which was slightly uncomfortable. In fact, I had a mark there for weeks. I wonder what it was shaped like.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is probably not the worst disaster ever, but it was a day my intelligence took a very big hit. On the upside, my mental routine on the brew day has improved, and I'll probably never forget a hose braid again, and I'm very careful while chilling now. So there you go.
There you go.
Be careful with that hot wort. I have one more injury story. Remember last time we got a photo of an injury?
Oh, that's right.
Oh, don't send the photos.
Yeah.
We'll take your word for it. Boy. Last year, this is from Mike. And I can't find where you are, Mike. I'm sorry. I've heard from you before, but I couldn't find you. Last year, I got a new grain mill. I got the 3-roller Frankenstein. Oh, nice. I attached my drill and started grinding my grains, and the grain started coming out the side. Uh-oh. I held up my hand next to the opening to stop the milled grain from growing on the floor. Must have had the drill backwards. Mm-hmm. I got my thumb too close to the mill and pulled it into the mill. I ended up in the emergency room and had to get my thumb stitched up. The doctor said my thumb was degloved.
Oh, boy, that just, yeah.
I did finish my brew day the next day. I'm all healed up now, and the mill has a cardboard cover to keep the grain in. That makes certain...
That's pucker.
Yeah, exactly. That makes certain parts scrunch up. Degloved. Wow. I'll give you a moment.
Yeah.
This is from AC. Your request for stories of brew days gone bad brings up so many memories over the 18 years I've been brewing. There were a couple of dropped carboys, yes, full ones, more boilovers than I'd like to admit, and a brew kettle full of near-boiling wort that I spilled while transferring it for cooling. Managed only first-degree burns on that and totally justified my Blickman top-tier system to my wife in the process.
There you
see?
go.
Even if you have to hurt yourself. Well, I don't know if it's worth it, but anyway.
Well, we've suffered for this beer, and now it's your turn.
It says, one specific episode comes to mind. After college, I stayed put and worked for the University of Florida, partially thanks to a great brew club in town, the Hogtown Brewers. While my younger brother finished school, we lived together, and Wes was often heard proclaiming on my brew days, "Man, it stinks in here." Well, my first attempt at a Belgian wit went well on brew day. I hit my gravities, no boilovers, no mishaps, and no big mess after chilling and transferring into primary. I decided to dry hop the beer with several of the spices, and since I was into simpler is better, at that point, I just waited a couple of days into primary fermentation to just dump my crushed coriander and orange peel into my carboy. All seemed to be going well, but my airlock stopped bubbling a bit earlier than usual. Thinking fermentation was done, I pulled the carboy out of the cupboard, lifted it onto the counter, and popped off the cap. As I was about to put the racking cane into the neck of the carboy, I noticed that it seemed to be plugged with krausen, spices, and other brew crud. Not putting one and one together, I just jabbed at the plug with my racking cane, which subsequently set off the biggest wit geyser you've ever seen. The carboy was actually erupting all the way to the ceiling. Of course, this was exactly the time my brother walked into the kitchen and proceeded to roll on the floor in laughter. About 2.5 gallons were lost in the mess, but the remaining 2.5 gallons were very tasty.
Well, there you go.
Or maybe I was just imagining it was tasty to make up for all the cleaning I had to do.
That's what you get for using a Mentos-filled racking cane.
Oh, my gosh. Oh. Now, we're going to discover another common theme here. This is Pat from Louisville, Texas. Back in the spring, I was getting ready to brew my first barley wine, and thanks to some Christmas presents, picked up a pack of Wyeast's Neo Britannia, a strain that's exclusive to Northern Brewer. I had my starter stirred up and chilled to crash the yeast when we got a call that my fiance's dad died unexpectedly. I'm sorry to hear that. As we made plans to drive out to Knoxville, I gave the starter to a friend so that it wouldn't go to waste. Fast forward a month, and my son is visiting me for spring break. I've got another pack of that same yeast, stirred up a starter, and started teaching my son to brew. Nice thing to do.
Yep.
We get the wort chilled and the yeast pitched, and then button up the fermentation chamber and go to bed. At about 7 o'clock in the morning, I heard a bang, but thought it was something my son had dropped and just kept getting ready for our day out. A little while later, I decided to show him what active fermentation looks like. Boy,
did I.
Boy, did we get a surprise in the form of a krausen volcano, and he sent a picture here. I got some towels down, got the carboy out of the fermentation chamber, and started cleaning up. Once everything was cleaned up and the volcano continued this whole time, I hacked my auto siphon to get tubing for a blow-off. There was so much volume coming out that the bubbles were audible over the phone. Whew. I'm getting ready to bottle what is now going to be an annual memorial brew. That's appropriate. And it's delicious. We all think that it was her dad's way of saying thanks.
Oh.
Well, there you go. Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
That gives me chills a little bit. That's nice. Alex from Ann Arbor, Michigan. 2 from Ann Arbor. Just listening to your podcast and could not help but share one of my first brew day disasters. I'm able to brew my most during the winter. Every year, the wife and kids leave for a few weeks during the Michigan winter and retreat to Florida. This is my most productive time to brew. During one of my first multi-brew winter weekends, I experienced my first, quote-unquote, healthy fermentation. Foreshadowing. On Saturday, I had just finished my first batch of IPA and pitched the yeast. The next morning, I was up before dawn getting prepared for my next batch. I noticed the bubbler on my batch of IPA very active. Delighted with the airlock action, I did not realize it was sitting on my newly renovated kitchen floor. Renovated with radiant flooring.
Yeah.
As the heat built right into the floor there.
Yeah.
As with any normal winter morning, the programmable thermostat turns up around 7 a.m. My next batch started up nicely, and I started the boil. Usually at this time in my brew day, I enjoy a brew. As I walked over to the fridge, I noticed the bubbles in the airlock were brown in color, and the fermentation was going bonkers. I decided to relieve the pressure in the bucket. Bending over with one hand on the edge of the bucket and loosening the airlock, I pulled it out, and wham! Fermenting beer shot out of the small rubber opening directly into my eye. As I moved, the geyser shot directly to the ceiling. Temporarily blinded, I rushed to gather towels to stop the mess from spreading into my new kitchen. When the smoke cleared, I rinsed out my eye and cleaned the floor and walls before the heat made it an even more sticky mess. All the while hearing my wife's voice before she left saying, "Don't mess up my brand new kitchen." I cleaned up the evidence and no one was the wiser, so I thought. Fast forward to a week later, while helping the family unpack, my wife says, "What's that brown mark on the ceiling?" Quickly, playing dumb, I blamed it on the contractor's lack to apply a second coat of paint. She read me like a book and said, "That's beer, isn't it?" I confessed and told her the story. She was very amused and gave me the idea for the name. Why don't you call it Shot in the Eye PA?
That's good.
So it was. And it's been, so it is, and it has been brew over and again, minus the I beer wash. It's one of our favorites. He says he's been a loyal listener since 2006. Both you and Steve were great. So there you go. And I enjoy your chemistry, he says. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate that. Brew in the eye, PA. David from Duvall, Washington. Back in my younger days of brewing, I was fascinated with meads. I still am. However, my patience of waiting months for the delicious concoction to finish faded as I discovered the fun of all-grain brewing. I wouldn't say that this was a brew day disaster, but rather a general brew disaster. It was wintertime in Bozeman, Montana, where I was going to college. I had a few meads under my belt, including a delicious pomegranate melomel. I decided to get a blackberry melomel going, so I got honey, water, yeast, and the blackberries. I mixed all the ingredients into a 6-gallon glass carboy one night after class and went to bed. I woke up the next day disappointed that my mead had not started, but figured it was possibly due to the cooler temps in my apartment. As a poor college student trying to save money, I kept the thermostat between 55 and 60. Well, knowing that the yeast I used didn't like working at cooler temperatures, I bumped the temperature up to 68 degrees, and off to class I went. I got home around 1 p.m., and to my slight surprise, his stove was on fire. No, that was... I found some bubbles coming out of the airlock in what appeared to be somewhat healthy, albeit slow fermentation. I retired back to my room to study and work on homework. After about 5 hours, I emerged to see that the fermentation had picked up quite a bit. I was now seeing a bubble a second. All the fruit was floating on top of the concoction. Now, at this point, I will say that I did leave plenty of headroom in the carboy to make sure the fruit would not create a plug to prevent the CO2 from escaping. You can probably see where this is headed at this point.
Yeah.
I had dinner, watched some TV, and went back to my room to finish up my homework and go to bed. It was about 9 p.m. when I was laying in bed watching some TV when I heard a very loud whoomp. I sat up, not knowing whether it was a neighbor above me, a knock at the door, or something in my apartment. I emerged from my bedroom and made my way to the kitchen, where I found the source of the noise. 6 pounds of blackberries were no longer in the carboy. They were strewn across my apartment and kitchen, with what I would assume to be a 2-pound clump directly above the carboy, plastered to the ceiling. A beautiful pattern of dark red streaks radiated from ground zero, or is it ceiling zero? I found chunks of blackberries on the sliding glass door to my deck, which was a good 12 feet away. The carpet was coated with bits of blackberries. The drapes, the TV, the dishes, the refrigerator, and microwave were all coated. In fact, there was basically nothing inside of the carboy that was able to hide from bits of blackberries. After staring around the apartment in awe for a good 5 minutes, reality sunk in. I now had to clean the blackberry bits from everything, including the nice white carpet, nice white walls. At about, he says he walked away with an important lesson. Don't ever use a glass carboy as a fermentation vessel if you intend on brewing in the primary with fruit. You may think that you give it enough headroom, but you probably don't, and the price you pay can go far beyond losing just a batch of alcohol.
Yeah,
thanks, David. Wow.
Kind of a thermobaric bomb.
Oomp. Oomp. Ed from Meban, North Carolina. My brewing nightmare is my first and last time attempting to make homemade soda. I just finished homemade root beer soda and pop by Creswell. I just bottled my organic cherry vanilla soda in glass. I left them in my kitchen at room temperature. The following morning, I tried one, and it was undercarbonated. I left the apartment to watch football. When I came back, a chain reaction of bottle bombs greeted me when I got home.
Oh, no.
Glass shards and blood-red syrups covered the walls, ceiling, and floor. Days were spent cleaning it up. 5 years later, I'm going to try it again. This time, I'm going to use non-fermentable stevia for sweetness and just enough corn sugar to give it fizz. Oh, and I'm going to use plastic bottles this time. You got to watch that soda.
Yeah.
You got to check it often. And I now have in my hand
the last one.
The final story.
There are no other brewing disasters in the world.
No other. You're right. Geyser breath. Okay, this is from Paul in Libertyville, Illinois. And I got to say, this is one of my favorites. We've heard some good stories.
Yeah.
Okay. I hadn't been brewing for a year yet when I decided to try a raspberry wheat beer. Everything went great on brew day, and I ended up with a good wheat beer that fermented out in between 1 to 2 weeks. Then I added raspberries to the secondary. It was 4 pounds of frozen raspberries that I put into a carboy and then racked the fully fermented beer on top of it. I even had the forethought to put it in the shower because I didn't want pink beer oozing out of the airlock and onto the floor in case fermentation kicked in again. There he goes. He's
thinking ahead.
Yes, doing well. So the next morning, I go to take a peek at my beer, and sure enough, my plan worked. Even though the beer had begun fermenting again with the addition of raspberries and started oozing out of the airlock, it was going into the shower drain. So everything's going just fine. Mm-hmm. So I get ready to hop into the shower, and the last thing that I'm going to do is pull the airlock and give it a quick rinse before popping it back in and then taking a shower and getting ready for work. I remember pulling the airlock, and the rest is a blur. The beer had obviously been under pressure, and instead of a slow pink trickle flowing down to the shower drain, I had a full-on pink geyser spraying me in the face, onto the ceiling, and all over the bathroom. My wife was brushing my 3-year-old's teeth in the bathroom next door, and she came in to find her husband wearing nothing but raspberry wheat beer, furiously trying to shove the airlock back into the cork while cursing up a storm. And she was the one who had to explain to the painters why they needed to pick raspberry seeds off the ceiling.
Oh, my.
But the beer turned out great. Not very sweet, but the raspberry flavor held up really well for months afterwards. I'd do it again, except next time and use a blow-off tube. That's Paul in Libertyville, Illinois. Oh, my gosh. Can you imagine?
Well, yeah, I can imagine, but...
Can you imagine hearing a noise, walking in, what she was thinking when she walked in and found her husband dancing in a pink geyser naked in the shower. Yeah.
Well,
you know you're a home brewer when.
That's right.
Well, we're running a little long this time, but I thought, this is going to be the last show of the year. I'm going to take next week off, the week between Christmas and New Year's. The kids are going to be home, and maybe we can find something to do other than look at little bitty screens.
Yeah.
So thanks, Steve, for coming out, being the kind of live studio audience of the.
It's always a pleasure to be in the peanut gallery.
Don't fly too close to the sun, and
or your bung will melt. And we know that can be painful.
But I want to thank everybody for I can't believe we started this in July of 2005.
Yeah,
here it is, just going into 2012.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It's nuts. I appreciate everybody listening for giving me the reason and excuse to spend time with my friends.
Yeah,
and it sounds like we're ending, but we're not. We're gonna, Lord willing, the creek don't rise. We'll be back first week of 2012, starting over a calendar year all over again.
How fun will that be?
Yeah. So Happy New Year, everybody. Happy Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and as we say, always say you can just recite everything I say at the end of the podcast. Just go to our store, go to our site, buy our stuff, click on our links, and happy brewing.
See you next year.